And now we present to you Thac0 with Advantage.
Welcome to Thac0 with Advantage. We're two friends that have been playing D&D a long time. While we both love lots of other RPGs, D&D can still be unpredictable. I'm Ange. I play rogues and sorcerers, occasionally fighters. There's also been a cleric and a ranger and a wizard and a druid. I guess you could say the main through line to my life is that I play RPGs and talk about it. You're listening to me right now, and look at Gnome Stew as well.
I found RPGs when I was just realizing what hyperfixation was. Not that I had a name for it, but that I knew that the feeling would hit me over and over and over again. So it was kind of nice to be able to turn that around and be able to share that hyperfixation with all of my friends. I'm terrible at math, so I can't tell you how long ago that was. That is totally the only reason why I can't tell you how long ago that was. But if you want to read my articles and reviews, you can find them on jr.com and gnomestew.com. After we look at the games we're running in the campaign journal, we'll be talking about playing against type. Then we'll have some recommendations of D&D related content for you to check out in our downtime research segment.
Now stand by for station identification. This is WD&D the Role Player. Now we're going to Mac McKinney in the morning game with Wolfman.
While there are a lot of people who have argued otherwise, D&D has had rules to facilitate role-playing almost from the beginning. Alignment is the first step along that path, but it created moral absolutes that were often wielded against players instead of supporting their character decisions. Reason 1 for why alignment is dumb. The second edition Ravenloft box set introduced the Dark Gifts, temptations that would slowly turn PCs into the same Dark Lords whose evil they were resisting. But although these provided some benefits, they were, like alignment, mainly a tool of negative reinforcement. Reason 1 for why alignment is dumb. Again. Not really a fan of negative reinforcement design. I agree with you, Wolfman. Now let's get into players' options, skills, and powers, which introduce one of the worst things you can do in any RPG, giving PCs more starting abilities for taking a flaw, where the real game was picking a flaw that would never affect you significantly. My power gamer approves. So did mine, Wolfman, so did mine. Now, with D&D 5e, we got personality traits, ideals, bonds, and flaws that involved positive reinforcement. Way to not suck with that design. You get something extra for role-playing. Just not if you already have inspiration. House rule, house rule, house rule. We did, Wolfman. You can now have up to 3, remember? Oh yeah, I remember that. Good house rule. Finally, the way you got inspiration was really wibbly-wobbly, so deciding if someone got inspiration often turned into a debate or at least a prolonged discussion in the middle of a session. They were so close, Mac. Just so close.
Let me just finish up this campaign journal.
Since we last talked, I got to play in City of Cowls, and I ran the first session of my Victoriana Dreadful Inquiries campaign. We missed a session of the Old Margrave for a variety of reasons, which I actually can't remember at this point, but I knew that there was reasons we couldn't play, so we didn't play. I basically spent that Saturday just staring off into space. With City of Cowls, we started venturing into the corrupted forest. Even before the veil fell between the world and the abyss, this was a dark, twisted place from the old wars. We needed to find the tree at the heart of the forest and hopefully heal it. This is a task that was given to us by the nature goddess Melora. At the start, we had a pretty easy path to follow, which should have been a warning. But hey, it's a pretty easy path to follow through this really creepy, weird forest. We came across a pool where we discovered a young woman with her mother and her grandmother. I think you know where this was going. They claimed to be the guardians of the forest in service of Melora, the nature goddess, who this forest and grove was supposed to be for, but something didn't seem right. Hags. They were hags. The mother was an anise hag, the crone was a night hag, but the maiden turned out to be a corrupted dryad. There was also a corrupted tree ant and another corrupted tree spawn thing that was basically described as a tree made of meat. That was the thing that had made the path through the forest that we were following. So the pond was also a hazard, as anyone entering the water had to make their save with their lowest save ability. Our barbarian went in first, not knowing any of this. None of us knew this. And she shockingly made her save. I don't remember if it was int or wisdom, but it was low because she got a nat 19 on the die, so her total was 18. We defeated the 2 hags pretty quickly, but the dryad was a problem. She had some kind of ability that would start turning people to stone, and she kept going on about turning us into statues for her garden. Ree, kind of still high on the I united the Dragonborn Empire, was like, I want a statue! I want a statue of me, at which point me, as Dove, was like, look, if we survive this, I'll make you a statue in the middle of Indus, not here. The treant and the spawn were basically hit point sponges, so it was a pretty exciting fight. At the end, Ree got knocked into the water again, and this time she failed her save, so the very end of the fight was having to deal with a raging barbarian trying to kill all of us, with us not trying to hurt her too badly. Eventually, we got that under control, took a short rest, and continued on into the forest with all sorts of creepy stuff, like flies that had eyes in them that would watch us as they flew by. At one point, an oak leaf fell on Dove's shoulder, and I could feel some sort of force trying to take over her mind. Eventually, we came to another clearing, and we saw a ghostly figure kind of doing something on the other side. We tried to communicate with it. As we were doing that, we were attacked by specters, wraiths, and other ghostly things. The ghostly figure was a tiefling, and she ended up attacking the specters as well. So when the fight was over, we tried communicating with her again, and it was obvious she could understand us, but we could not hear her. So I tried using message, and hey, it worked! So we found out that she was the Arch of the Grove. She didn't realize she was actually dead, or how much time had passed. She couldn't leave the vicinity of her body, but she could give us directions on how to find the sacred tree. She also agreed to be resurrected, but when we looked into that spell, resurrection takes a lot out of the caster. Basically, as soon as it is cast, the caster is done for the day. They have a level of exhaustion, and all of their spell slots are gone and spent. So all they would have would be their cantrips at disadvantage. So we told her we would make sure we would do it. We just need to go deal with the grove first, because we cannot afford to be down our lightning cleric. Now, I'm not saying that because we need him for healing, because if Alaric is healing us, something has gone terribly wrong. He doesn't like healing us. He'd rather hit things with lightning bolts. Our healer is our celestial warlock. We'll get into the playing against type thing in a little bit. With the Victoriana game, one of my players wasn't going to be there for this session, and since it was the first session, I decided to do a little opening quest that's a little disconnected from the main adventures I'm going to be running. During session 0, they had decided they wanted a mentor to kind of create their association, so I created Llewellyn Darby, a consulting detective who had to retire due to an injury a couple years before, and his husband, who owns the pub that will be their base, was really tired of him sitting around getting in his way and being bored out of his mind, so he encouraged him to find some young people and create this association.
It's almost like if he was in another reality, he'd be sitting in a bathtub playing Among Us with people.
I mean, he might just be based on Benoit Blanc just a little bit. Anyway, Llewellyn basically reached out to each PC and asked them to meet at the pub for basically a potential long-term endeavor. He then, kind of as a trial, asked them to invest a case that somebody had brought to him where a body was missing from a grave. Basically, a young man died of consumption the month before, and when his widowed mother went to his grave on New Year's morning, the grave was empty. This turned out to be a good little mystery for the opening, as it let them get used to their characters and their ability. They talked with the family to get clues. They investigated the grave site. They ended up going to the Thaumaturge Guild and investigate more there. And then they tracked down the malefic Thaumaturge playing with forbidden necromantic magic and taking him out in a rather spectacular fashion. Basically, he was running away, and our thaumaturge basically shot a bolt of energy at him and got a nat 20, so critted when the guy had only about 3 hit points left. So that kind of dealt with that. There was no pulling your punches on that one. Oh, yeah. And there were zombies, too. They fought zombies. I'll be starting the first adventure of the Dreadful Inquiries series next. I will probably be a little cagey about the plot points since it is a published scenario, but the book isn't out yet, so I kind of have some insider knowledge there, and I'm going to be nice and not spoil any of it.
When you mentioned the hags in the City of Cal's game, I really like that the 2024 Monster Manual gave us, like, I think it's CR22 arch-hags, because hags should be something that you can fight at different levels. I still think they need, like, a CR 13 through 15 hag in there, too.
Yeah.
Because even night hags are not that big a deal.
Oh, we took out the 2 hags. Like, the 2 hags were down within 3 rounds. Like, I think the one was down before she could do anything. I think the big one, the Annis hag, went down right away because everyone was like, hag! Ugh! Everything at the hag. And then the night hag got a chance to do something, and then she was down before I think she got a chance to do anything else. That dryad, though, really came close to screwing us up.
Just saying, they beefed up that hag that showed up in Baldur's Gate 3.
Yes. Well, we had already fought a hag in the campaign. There was a hag that was responsible for the blight that was starting to ravage the land. She'd been put up to it by the cult or something along those lines. And we had to kind of track down the source of the blight. And it was this hag, and she did this thing where she basically bamfed us into the Shadowfell or something along those lines. It was a trap, and we had to fight our way out and then fight her. And that was a pretty wild fight. But we were 14th level now, so we were probably 8th level then.
Yeah, I was going to say, when all of you fought that night hag when you were 9th level, I think, I bumped her up as best I could to about a CR 14.
Yeah.
So that she actually survived more than a little bit of you pounding on her. Gamehole Con happened without me, but enough of my players weren't around for our regular Thursday night game, and both of my monthly Saturday games hit early this month. So I guess my RPG experience since the last time we talked is installing Banner Saga, Pillars of Eternity, and Kingmaker on my new laptop. That's all I got right now. Before we get any further into this exciting episode, here is our Eldritch invocation. We have a Patreon. If you enjoy our show and want to help us keep doing it, we would love it if you decided to join. In addition to supporting the show, we also provide additional content like the Defiling Magic document that I came up with, Chris's campaign materials for the Heroes of Havel's Way, and we also have a Thac0 with Advantage Discord that anyone can jump into and join the conversation. So if you're interested in that, please look us up at patreon.com/THAC0WA.
Welcome to the Dungeon Master's Workshop.
We all like a breath of fresh air once in a while, so it's no surprise that sometimes we're drawn to playing against type, looking for a fantasy trope to turn inside out when we play our next character. But sometimes that desire to play against type can feel more like a contrarianism than a characterization. So today, we're going to look at why and how you may want to play against type. Starting right off the bat, what are some of the best-known fantasy archetypes?
The hard-drinking, gold-loving dwarven fighter. That's all they care about, fighting and gold, and they carry massive grudges.
Watch Lord of the Rings, any of the characters. Your lone wolf ranger, your halfling thief, your elven archer.
I will agree, but I will also say that D&D flattened a lot of those characters because a lot more exists than exists in the archetypes, but the shadow of the archetypes is what kind of made it into D&D for a lot of those.
Yeah.
I would also say now your hard-bitten, grizzled monster hunter with Geralt is probably pretty well installed as an archetype.
Yeah, and I mean, the wizard archetype it's still got a lot of that old man with a pointy hat flavor to it, and that's just not what most people play. But that's kind of, if you draw a picture, that's a wizard, and everyone's going to point it and go, wizard.
I do think, though, there is still that the wizard being smarter than everyone else they encounter as a trope that happens a lot with wizard characters.
Yeah. The bard flirting with everybody.
The Witcher doesn't help with that one either, because
no,
Jaskier is 100% that trope.
Yeah. The fact that so many of your quests in the game are dealing with his quote-unquote lady problems were always ladies.
And Scanlan in Critical Role doesn't exactly help with that trope either.
No, he doesn't. He does not help with that.
When you mention the halfling thief, the thing that's kind of funny about that is we have that ingrained in us largely because of Bilbo, but being an adventuring thief is completely antithetical to Hobbit society in those books.
You know, you take a look at any of the D&D classes, and there is an archetype that will spring to mind. The barbarian, the tall dude in a loincloth with a big sword. The cleric, the pious person in robes with the slight halo over their head. The paladin, the full armor, the self-righteous assholeness of telling you what you need to do. Like, all of these classes have a character that those of us that have been playing D&D for a long time will immediately picture when that class is mentioned.
Speaking of those tropes that are just so ingrained, but they actually kind of don't fit the most well-known version of it, the dumb barbarian thing is very, very ingrained in the portrayal of barbarians. But when you look at, for example, Conan is not a dumb guy. Like, especially if you read any of Howard's books, he is like a strategic person that is always calculating things, and he might take risks, but he takes risks because it's going to make him rich or something along those lines.
I think this leads me to my next talking point here, which is, are there well-known fantasy archetypes that came directly from D&D? And I'm going to point to that dumb barbarian, because one of the things that happens with D&D-like games is you have stats that are important and stats that are less important.
Yep.
Which means you very often have that barbarian with intelligence as a dump stat.
Oh, yeah, absolutely. And speaking of archetypes that arise out of those things, Raistlin is the sickly wizard that a lot of us think about, but Raistlin is also a sickly wizard because you don't need your physical stats if you want to boost your intelligence as high as you can get it.
Yep. You know, the whole Dragonlance series has a whole bunch of these, and some of these characters became archetypes.
Mm-hmm.
Raistlin became an archetype that people like to try and play in D&D. The sickly wizard who was scheming and doing things in the shadows.
Yeah, not just smarter than you, but also like really sarcastic and a little bit cruel with his humor.
Yeah. There are GMs everywhere who, like, if a player came, I want to play a character like Raistlin, just cringed and died inside just a little bit. Same thing with Tasselhoff. Tasselhoff really brought out that, I'm a halfling and I'm a thief and I'm going to steal anything that's not nailed down.
I have a feeling that there are more people that have an idea of what a Kender rogue is supposed to be based on an archetype than have actually played in Dragonlance or read any of the novels. I think that archetype exploded outside of its normal bounds.
Yeah, and there's also the Dark Elf Ranger.
Uh-huh.
Where we have Dritz, and, there was a period of time in the 80s through the 90s where there were a lot of people trying to play a Tasselhoff, a Raistlin, or a Dritz, and making GMs and the other players at the table miserable.
And I think there was a broader archetype that's going to play into one of our other parts of this discussion. Drizzt was part of the unfortunate archetype of the person from an evil species that is actually good. Because that became, Kaz was this in Dragonlance. It was this idea that, oh, no, they're normally evil, but he's the good one. Not actually a good archetype. but definitely one that did start to evolve a bit in D&D.
Yeah.
I'd also say that it's interesting. I think Sturm hits a lot of the paladin archetype, even though he was a fighter, because just the whole knightly, how he acted, and the fact that he would do things that literally were not good for the party because his code of honor did not allow him to do things that a normal adventurer would do out of expediency.
Let's take a moment and talk about older editions of D&D. Were they more restrictive about deviating from the archetypes, or did it just feel that way? Because I bounced off of D&D pretty hard in the late 80s because I was tired of feeling like all my characters had to fit in these very specific boxes.
Let me turn that around and say, how many dwarven wizards did you see in your games before 3rd edition?
Not a damn one.
Yeah, there were a lot of hard limits built into the game. Dwarves could not use arcane magic. They couldn't be bards. They couldn't be rangers. They literally were only good at being fighters, rogues, and clerics.
Yeah. There was the whole other, the cleric quintet that was the R.A. Salvatore story he did in addition to the Dritz series, where it was a joke that there was a dwarf who wanted to be a druid.
Yeah.
And then all of a sudden, 2000 hits and we get 3rd edition, and you could make a dwarf that was a druid, not just delusionally thought he was one.
Yeah. The other thing that really hits is even when you could be a thing, the game was telling you it's a bad idea to be that thing. If you were playing a halfling, you could be a fighter. You couldn't go above 5th level. Even if back then you might play D&D for a couple years and not be 5th level yet, but just the idea that once you hit 5th level, you will never get any better at being a fighter, that's not going to encourage you to really want to be the best halfling swordsman that ever lived.
There were also a lot of alignment restrictions. I ran into this playing Pathfinder Kingmaker not too long ago. I made a monk for the hell of it. And about halfway, 2/3 of the way through the game, I reached a point where I could no longer level up as a monk because I had basically tipped her over from neutral good to chaotic good. And the game was like, oh, nope, or like whatever it was. I think I tipped from lawful good to neutral good.
Yeah, monks had to be lawful no matter what else they were.
Yeah, I tipped from lawful to neutral, and it's like, oh, you can't be a monk no more. And I'm like, what the hell? I played that game twice before, so this was just me wanting something to play around, but that killed my enjoyment of the game because all of a sudden I could not explore that class any further because just some of my choices are like, you can't be a monk now, you're not lawful enough. What the hell, man?
And I've never seen it play this direction before, but if you became lawful and you were a barbarian, you couldn't level up anymore.
Yeah.
One of the things that was kind of interesting when you bring up the Drow Ranger thing is that intrinsically, if you were playing a Drow Ranger, you were going to be playing a good Drow because you could not be a Ranger in older editions without being good aligned.
I think 3rd edition obviously still had some alignment restrictions because Pathfinder is based off of 3rd edition, which was why the monk had to be lawful and all of that. This is why one of the first games I ever put together to run as a one-shot in my very early days of GMing in the mid-2000s was I made a group of PCs that were against archetypes. The dwarf wizard. I made the half-orc bard. I think the gnome druid and the halfling barbarian. I think I also had the human was a fighter because there was just nothing that wasn't normal for a human to be. But I had an elf rogue and a half-elf cleric because half-elves and humans, they can be almost anything. But I did this because I wanted to have characters that went against the expected archetype. Mm-hmm. That was such a revolutionary thing in 2005 because, ooh, it's a dwarf wizard. Why would somebody make a dwarf be a wizard? Why would that gnome be a druid? It's like, because you can. You can make these stories for these characters.
For a long time, you could only be a paladin if you were human, which actually caused some controversy because the 1st edition unearthed said, and half-elves can do it too. And there were people that were mad about it. Dragon Magazine's forum, there was actually a section of the magazine called Forum that would be letters that people wrote in that were extremely long talking about why the game wasn't the way it should be. And it was fascinating to read and also precursored what actual forums turned into later on.
Yeah.
But yeah, that was a controversial move, even letting half-elves become paladins. I played a half-elf paladin, by the way, because as soon as I saw that, I was like, that's different. I'm going to play it. Because like we were saying, sometimes there's a draw to that idea of somebody finally saying, you can do this now.
That kind of goes into why do people want to play against the established archetype? This is actually a thing I see all the time in some of the discussion groups I tangentially part of on Facebook, where there are a whole lot of grognards still very mad that people can be unusual things. But why do people want to play against the established archetype?
For one thing, it's just the idea that it is something different. It's not something you've seen 100 different times. So it's a new path. You know, no one is going to tell you that you are playing your Knoll Ranger too much like Drist, because intrinsically people just don't assume that it's, you know, a Knoll is going to be doing the same things that a Dark Elf did.
As I said, I bounced off of D&D in the late 80s, and part of that was my character ideas were so limited. I had no interest in really playing a fighter type, and there were certain classes that I felt more comfortable with. And so, like, about the fourth or fifth time I'm making a thief, I'm like, ugh, I already made her. She already died about 5 times in the stupid dungeons that were poorly chosen. So I got really bored because I felt like my characters couldn't be different from what they already had been. And part of that was me, you know, part of that was the people I was playing with, but it still felt very constrictive. And I had so much more freedom when I started playing superhero games or vampire or werewolf, where, yeah, there were still the archetypes in those games, but there was a lot more freedom to flavor the specific character different than what I was seeing and experiencing in first and second edition D&D.
It's really funny because for a long time, I loved the idea of a dwarven wizard, but earlier editions, like, they didn't just say dwarves couldn't be wizards. They gave them like bonuses to save against magic, and like even some of the novels went into like dwarves are this sort of like magic sink. Magic doesn't like them. It doesn't bond to them. It's even hard for them to make magic items. And it's like, I don't know where that came from, because in Norse mythology, they make magic items all the time. They're shapeshifters. They're tricksters. Like, this is not a thing that has anything to do with dwarves in Norse mythology.
Interesting twist on that in the Dragon Age setting. Basically, in Thedas, dwarves can't cast magic. They don't have enough of an affinity to the Fade and magic and all of that to be able to cast it. But because of that lack of affinity, that means they can work with lyrium in ways that other people can't, and therefore are the most adept at creating magical items, which I thought was an interesting twist on that.
Yeah, and that's an instance where they take something that had become a trope in D&D and added more texture to it and made it more interesting in the context of that setting, which Dragon Age does with a lot of things.
Yeah, elves in Dragon Age are a whole different subject.
But I mean, like you said, sometimes you just want to play something different. Sometimes you don't like the archetypes that do exist for something.
Yeah.
That's sometimes the archetypes that developed in D&D were not good archetypes when you look at what they were actually saying. We mentioned that a little bit with Drist, because that is possibly one of the worst things you can say, to say, but he's one of the good ones. That is horrible.
Yeah.
That should never be something that ends up being an archetype. But even things like, I'm not just going to play the dumb barbarian, I'm going to play the dumb orc barbarian, because orcs are born stupid and they can't get smart.
Yeah, there's a lot of issues with declaring an entire species as evil or declaring them as good. You know, like, either direction is like, no, there's a lot more there. I mean, we've talked a little bit about this in our alignment episode, which I don't know what episode that was. It was a while ago. But I've never felt right with that whole, well, this whole species is evil.
Yeah, no. And even just the idea that everyone in a species has a particular way of doing things where there's no variety from that is a problem. I love Dragonlance, but they had several of these things. The way that they would portray Kender earlier in some of the game material was they steal things because that's intrinsically part of them. Like they were changed by the Grey Gem of Gargath, and now that stealing is just part of what they do. Which I think it's interesting to look at how Kender view property from a societal standpoint, but saying they're born that way is bad. Tinker Gnomes, it's the same thing. They are cursed to always build machines that don't work, and if they do work, it's accidentally some way that they don't intend it to. But every gnome, except for like one in a generation that is a mad gnome, is a tinker that is doomed to always make these worthless machines. And it's like, so again, you don't get to look at the culture and see how this develops as a culture. It's just a thing that is.
Yeah. Is it important to understand existing archetypes before deviating from them?
Yeah, I mean, archetypes are a form of trope, and I know people love subverting tropes, but sometimes people are so quick to subvert tropes, they don't look at why the trope was there in the first place. So then things don't feel like the genre that they're supposed to, because everyone is just intentionally throwing out every trope that they can think of. It is funny because it even gets to the point to where when people analyze media, sometimes they'll be like, I can identify that trope, therefore this thing is bad. No. That's silly. That's a very silly thing. But the reason you should understand something before you deviate from it is not to say don't deviate from it. It's so you know why what you're doing is different. Why was it this way, and why is what you're doing different from that?
One of the things I've seen in D&D is when people want to be edgy and cool and do something unusual with a class, and they basically just remake another class. It's I'm going to play a paladin, but I'm not going to lean into that lawful stuff. Mm-hmm. You're playing a fighter who occasionally gets to smite.
Yeah.
Or it's like, why not lean into the class that already does that thing that you're trying to be edgy for?
And it's interesting, too, because when you look at the old way that, for example, D&D did things, even I would say what you just brought up about dwarves and Dragon Age, they looked at the trope of dwarves aren't magical, dwarves can't be wizards, and they realized this is more of a mechanical thing than it is anything else. But instead of just saying this is a thing dwarves can't do, what is a thing that dwarves would then be better than other people at doing if this is the thing that is true? I really like that, because there you have to stop and think about what's going on. Even if you do something like, why were dwarves not wizards before, and is there a way I can work that into the setting? Really, a lot of it was just that people didn't want dwarves doing flashy things like teleporting or whatever. But then you can flavor things as a lot of dwarven cultures would have like war wizards and people that were specialized in throwing fire and lightning bolts, whereas the elves might do things where they were much more about teleporting and summoning things. And then you end up having some texture in those things. And also remember, not every dwarf should adhere to a culture like that.
I have a buddy who's running a D&D game, and he has a player who basically came to him and said, there's not a class that fits what I want to play. And he started describing what he wanted to play, and my buddy was like, that's a paladin. Oh, no, I don't want to play a paladin. I hate paladins. There's no way I'd ever play a paladin. But everything he was describing was a paladin.
Yeah.
So my buddy basically just took the paladin and filed off all the serial numbers, gave it some new flavor text, and that's what this guy is playing. But he's not playing a paladin because he hates paladins. Paladins are awful. Paladins are jerks. Nobody likes paladins. And I'm like, who hurt you? Which GM hurt you with a paladin? Because my dude.
To go off on our mandated comic book
tangent
that we must have in the middle of an episode, when you look at understanding an archetype before you deviate from them, something that has been huge in modern pop culture is the evil Superman trope, which I personally loathe. And part of why I loathe it is because people don't look at the existing archetype and say, why is Superman the way he is? And therefore, what are we saying when we are making an evil Superman. They just look at Superman as a goody-goody, so I want to make somebody like Homelander that is a horrible, terrible human being that is just incredibly powerful. And I'm not saying that there aren't some social commentary things going on with Homelander. I am also saying there are a lot of people out there that just think Homelander's so cool because he's just an evil bastard. And no, he's not really cool. He's a terrible, pathetic excuse for a human being. And part of that leads me to, for example, one of my favorite things is that in Kingdom Come, when the same thing happens to Superman that happens in Injustice, where Injustice tries to make this cool for a fighting game that Superman turns into a totalitarian jerk, what happened in Kingdom Come is when all of that happened, Superman retreated to the Fortress of Solitude because he didn't think humanity needed him anymore and they didn't want him around. That's what I picture Superman doing in a situation like that, not turning into a totalitarian dictator.
Yeah, there's a lot there. We could go down a rabbit hole really far with that topic. Are these traditional archetypes a thing of the past in modern fantasy gaming where characters are wildly diverse? Basically, we talked a little bit about this already. You know, we've got the grognards still out there going, why would somebody want to play an elephant man? I don't understand this. What's a turtle doing in this game?
I mean, the funny thing about that is we were even talking about this, though. As media expands, you have new standard bearers that become the archetypes. So there may not have been as many grizzled, tired monster hunters in previous years playing D&D, but now that you have Geralt, that is a thing that you are seeing much more often. So that is a new archetype, and I don't think that I am going to see anytime soon in my lifetime bards moving away from flirting with everything that draws breath. That hasn't slowed down at all.
No, I don't think that's going to slow down. I think taking a look at Critical Role, you've got the first campaign where they're playing a mostly traditional party that wouldn't look out of place in somebody's mid-90s game. You've got a Goliath in there, but for the most part, you've got half-elves and an elf and a human and a gnome and a halfling. I'm sorry, 2 gnomes. But then you move on to campaign 2, and now it's a little more diverse. You've got a goblin, you've got 2 tieflings, you've got a half-orc, you have whatever Yasha is. You know, you have these people who are way more diverse than that traditional party. And then you get into campaign 3, and all bets are off. You got a robot, you got a dead girl, you got a rock man.
Yasha is a great example because she was an Aasimar and a barbarian. So instead of being a paladin or a cleric or something that is more along those lines, she's this big muscular person that goes into a rage and beats the crap out of things.
We have a lot of fun in the City of Cowls game because we inadvertently made these characters that play against the archetypes. We have a cleric. He doesn't have the religion skill. He doesn't heal you. He tells you to walk it off. We have a warlock. The warlock is an Aasimar and on his Rumspringa from heaven. So he's got all the healing power. He's got the religion skill. We have a tiefling thief. She's the one that has the arcana skill because she's a book thief. Then we have our sorcerer who, don't ask me to tell you something smart. I don't have arcana. Ask me to charm somebody or talk to somebody. That's what I do. So we have this party that played against these archetypes just because it was more fun that way.
Yeah, I mean, in our Thursday night game, the person with the highest arcana skill is our fighter.
Yeah.
Marin, tell us about this magic.
I think 5th edition really enabled that because it was coming off of 4th edition, which was set up to work with people playing certain roles. There were characters that filled roles, and as long as you had the main 4 roles filled, it didn't matter what class they were playing. And 5th edition kind of carried some of that forward a little more loosely and basically just said, here are these characters, here are some subclasses. And the subclasses gave a lot of different flavor that could take things in a slightly different direction. We joke about oops all bards, but you could do that because you can have the character who is more focused on arcana, the character who is more focused on healing, the character who is more focused on martial skills, and have them all still be bards, because there's enough subclasses that allow that flavoring on those classes, which means you can break out of the archetypes easier.
One of the other things that's interesting about the lifespan of the traditional archetypes is we're really just now breaking free of the last thing that reinforced that, and that is having ability score modifiers, which streamline certain species into certain classes. Because, yes, there was nothing keeping you from playing an orc wizard in 5th edition, except if you were going by bolos, you were starting with a -2 to intelligence, because that was one of the only species they gave a -2 in 5th edition. So you were working real hard to make yourself as useful as any other wizard, because you were starting at such a deficit there. It was a disincentive to be something you weren't already good at. So if you were a member of a species that gets a bonus to charisma, you are going to want to be a bard or a sorcerer or whatever. You can be anything, but you're going to be slightly worse at it than anybody else that, has a bonus to that.
Yeah, 3rd edition opened a lot of doors for people to play with the archetypes and do different things, combining different classes with different species, but there were still a lot of unspoken fences that kind of said, yeah, you can do that, but you're not going to be as effective if you played a human who was doing that class.
Yeah, I love the idea of dwarven bards, because I actually think there's a lot of underlying history that talks about how dwarves enjoy their songs and their music and, all of that. But in 3rd edition, if you were going to play a dwarf bard, it's just like that orc wizard in 5th edition. You were starting with that hit to charisma, so you were basically, starting yourself out at a deficit when you're trying to play that against type there.
Yeah, and it's just some of those stat decisions really arbitrary. They're based on a couple of people's interpretation of the class. Oh, dwarves, they're bearded and dirty and down in the mines. They don't have charisma. I'm sorry, I've seen a lot of charismatic dwarves in other media.
Yeah, I mean, I actually would not think of Gimli as being uncharismatic. And Thorin basically had this whole group of dwarves that followed him because he was so charismatic. Some of that was supposed to reflect culture, like this culture doesn't value this or that. And that's bad on one hand because it's trying to make everyone in that culture one thing. But on the other hand, some of that was also saying genetically, this species is not good at this thing, or, what have you. That's much worse than just saying the culture doesn't value this thing.
Just going back to Dragon Age for a second, Varric Tethris. He's been in Dragon Age 2, Dragon Age 3, Dragon Age 4. People have complained in every game, why isn't he romanceable? People want to romance that dwarf, man.
I know. I'm really glad that 2024 has kind of moved away from that. Even when there are things that are kind of inescapable, like orcs and Goliaths have this build, why don't they have a strength bonus? You don't need to give them a strength bonus to do what they do, which is basically saying they count as the next size larger to carry things because they have a bigger frame.
Yeah.
That works much better.
What are the challenges of playing against type for the person running the game? What does the GM have to deal with when people are playing against type?
As much as you shouldn't rely on basic stereotypes, if someone hasn't done a whole lot to build that character other than just make them play against type. So I am going to be the happy dwarf wizard based on knowing what dwarves were like in other editions. That's all you know about the character. And sometimes people do fall into that trap of, I am this deviation from the norm. I'm not really a character. I am an exception.
Yeah.
And it becomes a little bit more two-dimensional and a little bit harder to latch onto, because even if that same person were playing a two-dimensional character that did play to type, at least then there's kind of this social contract of, I'm going to throw this out and this is the hook that you're going to take.
Yeah. I think the opposite can be true too. Not necessarily the opposite, but if the player has not communicated to the GM how their character deviates from the norm of that species or that class, the GM may set things up thinking that's going to engage that character, and it's going to fall flat because the player's going to be like, yeah, my character doesn't care about that.
Yeah.
What do you mean you don't care about that? You're playing an XYZ. No, I'm not into that. I'm different. I'm edgy, man.
And that's where, like, when we mentioned earlier about understanding the trope before you deviate from it, let's say you have somebody that is playing an Eluskan character. So they're a Northerner in the Forgotten Realms, and they decide to play a bard instead of a fighter because they think they're playing against type. If that person hasn't really dissected what that means, and they come to the table and they think they're going to be playing this Eluskan character that, you know, would be a fighter, but they're just happy-go-lucky and they're basically playing them like Jaskier, and the GM is thinking, oh, they're a Northman that is a bard, they must be a skald. They're going to, run into battle a little bit and, scream poetry into it. Then there's a misalignment there because they've backed into a different kind of archetype without realizing it.
There's also I'm going to bring height into this, character height, because there's this thing that can sometimes happen when you get a picture of your character being a certain way and then bring it to the table and find out everyone is that way. The Critical Role Campaign 4, Episode 1, Octus's player mentioned he was a short 5'11", which became a running joke because everyone was like, oh yeah, I'm a tall 5'11", or I'm a short 5'11". I actually had something like this happen to me in a game. I decided my character was going to be tall. I wanted her to be tall. She was a werewolf. She's going to be big. She's going to be a muscle girl. I wanted her to be tall, so I said she was 5'11". Every goddamn other person in that party was 5'11". The skinny fae was 5'11". The wizard was 5'11". The sea fish girl was 5'11". I'm just like, I can't be tall because I declared I was 5'11" and everyone else declared they were 5'11". Sometimes, like, that's a whole other tangent. It's probably not worth doing an episode about. But in those cases, you should just say, my character is tall. And then when people start bringing out actual numbers, you can figure out where you need to actually fall to be tall.
Yeah.
Because I've had conversations with people where we were talking about characters, and the girl who was 6'1" said, yeah, he's probably pretty short at 5'9". Whereas the girl who was 5'1", barely, was like, yeah, he's a tall 5'5". And it was like, okay, let's just use descriptors and people can place tall, short, medium where they need it to be for their frame of reference, because, yeah.
This goes off on one of my tangents of one of my other obsessions, but I saw someone that was reviewing action figures recently, and they were talking about how the Emma Frost action figure is a little tall. And what's funny about that is Emma Frost is 5'10". Like, that's her canonical height in Marvel Comics. So Emma's supposed to be the same height as Spider-Man. She's not too tall if she's the same height as Spider-Man.
She's supposed to be a supermodel.
Yeah.
They didn't have that term when she was created, really, but Emma Frost is supposed to be comparable to a supermodel.
And to bring this back around to this, you have to communicate with people so that you're all speaking the same language.
Yes.
Also, this is going to be a thing that people probably roll their eyes at, but it goes back to something you need to remember in session 0. When somebody is playing against type, ask them why they're playing against type. What does that mean to you? What do you want to get out of playing against type? If you are playing against type, do you want us to think of, if you have your jolly swashbuckling dwarven rogue that sometimes attacks people like Michael Myers, do you want us to think of that as standard in dwarven culture, or do you want people to think of you as different than most dwarves? Is that going to be a contrast, or do you kind of want to nudge the campaign as a whole in a different direction? Those are the kind of things you really do need to wheedle out when you have these situations where somebody is playing against type like that.
What do you do when someone playing against type ends up undermining the niche their character would normally occupy?
Yeah, this is interesting because, like I said, in 2024, in D&D at least, you don't have the same problem where, oh, you didn't pick the right species, so your stat boost is going to be a little bit lower. So you don't worry about that quite as much, but there are still people that will, for example, take feats to broaden their abilities instead of like boosting the ability score that they need for their class. And that's fine, but there is a point at which you're not really effective at anything that you're doing. So you really have to kind of look at how much you're doing that. How diffuse are you being? It's going to vary depending on how much your game worries about specific stats. If you're worried about that extra 5% chance to hit something, that can be very important. If your game, on the other hand, does have a good balance of things like role-playing and exploration and fighting, that may not be as big a deal. Although there, you can run into, you are half good at what multiple people in the party are fully good at, and not fully good at the things that you could be good at.
I think it depends a lot on how the players react to the fact that they're not good at the things the character is expected to be good at. Like, if they're okay with being mediocre at some of those things and they can roll with it, that's fine, especially if those things are covered by other characters in the group. But if they're going to get upset that they're not being effective in play, in combat, that's a problem. In the Undermountain campaign that I was playing, we had Tad, who was I want to call him a frog lock, and I'm like, that's the EverQuest term. He was a wrestler, so he was a little frog man who was a quote-unquote wrestler, and he was like 4 or 5 different classes, multi-class together, and like half of them were taken to give him things that he thought a frog person should have. He had poison spray because, well, poison spray. He would constantly apologize for not being very effective. And it's like, my dude, you're having fun. You're playing the character you made. You're still doing stuff to help everyone else in combat. And you're not getting upset because you're not being a badass like somebody else in the party. That's fine. You did that because you had an idea of what you wanted to make, but you made sure to lean into it and play it as like understanding that's what you were doing. And I mean, eventually he got the ability to turn himself into a T-Rex, so none of it mattered.
and yeah, that's the important part. Like, how much is it really undermining you, or is it conceptually undermining you? Is it in a world where this game is played the way most people expect the game to be played, you would be undermining yourself? Is this game played that way, or is it not?
Mm-hmm.
And there again, it kind of goes back to what we were talking about. It is doing things with intentionality, understanding that if you keep burning these feats because you want to learn 20 different languages, that may not come up that often. It may be fun to say that you can speak 20 different languages, but if that's never going to be useful in the game, maybe just talk to the GM and have them say, yeah, I'm going to let you train for languages faster than what the rules say. It doesn't matter.
If languages aren't going to mean anything in the campaign, let the guy have 6 languages.
Mm-hmm.
You know, put your feet towards something useful.
It is funny because I played in a Pathfinder game where we had the GM a few times when we were all playing basically demigods. You know, we were starting off as, you know, after an apocalypse, and all of us had a divine spark in us. We were all related to deities. And once in a while, when we said, oh, this character is descended from this god, and I want to do this, he would say, oh, take this ability. And that one player was so focused on playing Pathfinder the right way, he would literally deny those things and say, no, I don't want that feat because I didn't earn it. And he was like, I'm giving everybody extra stuff. And he was like, yeah, but you're not giving everybody just an extra feat. They're all getting different things. And then I would feel like I'm getting something extra that I'm not supposed to have. And also, I don't have the prerequisites for it. And it turned into a whole thing where he was so focused on doing it the right way, he would not take that extra feat that the GM was just saying, here, take it.
I mentioned before some of the Facebook community I kind of engage with on occasion, and how there are some grognard types in there who they just get so mad at people not playing games the way they think they should be played. The fact that somebody is a blue tiefling who hits things with a sucker, or that my friend played a little frog person who was about 6 different classes to basically say he was a wrestler. It's just, let people have fun. If the GM wants to constrain what options are available for players, that needs to be done in session 0.
Yeah.
If you want to set up a campaign where you have certain things in place story-wise for certain species or certain classes, like Chris did with Heroes of Havel's Way. He basically told us, if either of you want to play an arcane spellcaster, that's going to be different in this setting. And then both of us went, nah, we're good, and chose something else, which meant he had this entire thing set up for arcane spellcasters that we were like, nah, we're going to ignore that. But you can do that as a GM, set up the constraints of the world, and if it's interesting enough, your players are still going to have fun. You just have to figure out where those archetypes are going to be constrained in how they're played and what they do. And if you're a really good GM, you're just going to work with your players on how to fit in what they want to play with what you want to run.
And what's interesting is when you look at how we play our characters in the Heroes of Havel's Way, I don't think it's a standard druid thing to be as bookish as Odie is.
No.
And that is very interesting that is an element of her thing, because normally druids live out in nature and maybe they don't even hardly live in a house half the time. And from that same standpoint, I envisioned Aramon as being more like D'Artagnan heading off to join the Musketeers than a standard paladin. So I had much more of the duelist archetype in my head than just the, classically church-trained Templar that is going out to smite enemies of the faith. It was a lot more of a romantic notion that he becomes a paladin than it is, anything else.
Yeah, I love that he is a paladin, but he's still a disappointment to his father. It's this kind of twist on all of those things. Last question before we start getting out of here. What about playing against our own type? What do we get when we branch out from the very specific types of characters we like to play? As I mentioned at the beginning of the episode, I play rogues.
I can attest to this. For a lot of editions, I was a big Ranger fan, so I was playing Rangers. I have not done that quite as much at all in 5th edition. And that's not, an overt commentary on Rangers. Part of that is I've been running a lot of games, but I played enough that I could have. I really gravitated towards bards and clerics, though. I did bards and clerics multiple times, and that is also why when we started doing Heroes of Havel's Way, I was like, I really haven't played a paladin. I played like a first level paladin in one adventure. I want to actually play out a paladin story because it's something I haven't done yet in 5th edition.
I have tried very hard to branch out what I play. I mean, I joke that I play rogues. Rogues are my favorite class to play. If you put a video game in front of me, more than likely the first character type I'm going to make is going to be the rogue type. But I play enough RPGs that I'm like, I really need to branch out. I need to try different classes. So when I start making a character for a game, I'll sit down and be like, okay, who have I played recently? One of the issues that you run into with this is, if I make this character, how long am I going to get to play her? Because there are so many characters I've made who I get to play maybe 2 or 3 times, and then the character never gets played again. But I, in general, have gotten very careful about who am I playing, who are they, what do they look like, so I can vary them up. I have a whole bunch of character art on the wall behind me. I can't tell you how many of them are blonde, because I had a thing where when I was a little kid, I wanted to be blonde, and I started subconsciously making many of my PCs blonde. And one day I looked at all the pictures on the wall, and I'm like, ah, shit. I got to vary this up a little bit. And the same thing with the character classes. Like, I will take a look at what is it that is important to me to play, and how can I play that thing in different classes and species combinations thereof. Because ultimately what is important to me is that I play a big damn hero. I want to play a character that's trying to make a difference in the world and trying to help people. And I can do that in different ways depending upon what combination of class and species I put together. Like Kazina, tiefling rogue, grew up on the streets. She's got the urchin background. She's basically fighting against a genetic line that is telling her it's okay to be evil. All your forebears were evil. Come on, you can be evil. And she's like, nah, why would I do that? I want to help people. Selena, fighter. Mostly I played her because it was going to be a beer and pretzels game, but I wanted to have a character who could kind of help keep the rest of them safe and together and in line and remind everyone not to be murder hobos.
It's funny, like when I was talking about getting into my ranger niche, when I was playing 3rd edition, I think this is interesting from the standpoint of exactly what is your type, because I was playing rangers all the time, but I played a dwarf ranger, I played a gnoll ranger, I played a human ranger. Sometimes there's enough variance in part of what you choose that it's okay to maybe hit that same note a few times. You probably do want to branch out, but you're also trying to have fun.
Exactly.
Now let's join Ange and Jared for some downtime research, where they do the work so we don't have to.
Every episode, we're going to look for something related to D&D that we want to pass along to our listeners. It might be products, websites, videos, or podcasts, but it will always be something that we think will enhance your D&D experience.
Look, I know it's 10 years too late to be a cool kid about this, but I have fallen down the Critical Role rabbit hole thanks to Campaign 4. If you have not watched Campaign 4, I believe the first 3 episodes are all on YouTube for free at this point. Brennan will hook you within 15 minutes. And if you're like me and do that hyperfixation thing on occasion, you might want to keep getting a little more of that Critical Role taste. I am going to recommend you check out Critical Role Abridged. I basically never watched it because I could not afford to give 4 hours of my life to hundreds of episodes. By the time I was aware of Critical Role, they were already well into Campaign 1. And I'm like, I can't catch up with this. These people seem really cool. And this is a really neat idea. But I'll just pay attention and appreciate other people's enjoyment here. But then again, they came out with Legend of Vox Machina, and they're coming out with the Mighty Nine as animated series. And it's like, oh, hey, you can start to enjoy these in slightly easier to digest formats. And I have fallen down the rabbit hole for Critical Role Abridged, which is what they have done for Campaign 3. So these are hour-long episodes that they have basically shrunk down from the 4-ish hours that the actual episodes are. And it's fantastic. You get all the role-playing, you get all the character stuff without all of the... You still get enough of the game bits here and there. Like if somebody rolls a nat 20, they're going to tell you they rolled a nat 20.
Yeah.
If they roll a nat 1, they're going to tell you they rolled a nat 1. But a lot of the minutia and the fiddly bits are just basically cut out. And it's really cool.
Those moments that we all have where we're like, it's a 17 and I have a +3. That's 17, 18, 19, 20. Because some nights you're just not on completely.
Oh, yeah.
And so, yeah, you're not getting a lot of people trying to count out their rolls or figuring out how many dice they need to roll or things like that.
You still get all of the little great things that remind you that these are people who like each other playing a game together. Like an episode where Matt names a character something that is completely and utterly inappropriate and did not realize it until he said the character's name and everyone else started giggling. And then they were 5 minutes was just them giggling about this very inappropriate name that he had given to this character. It was brilliant.
Absolutely relatable. The only thing that would be more relatable to me is if his players kept pointing out that every one of his maps looks like some bit of human anatomy. Because I ran into that in a Pathfinder campaign, no matter what map I drew.
Anyway, we'll have a link in the show notes to YouTube for the playlist for Abridged. I recommend it. Like I said, I have fallen down the rabbit hole. I know I'm 10 years too late, but here I am right now.
So as long as we're going to talk about actual plays, the Session 0 for Tales from Wood Creek is up on YouTube. What is Tales from Wood Creek? It is Deborah Ann Wall's new actual play, and she has the Dungeon Dudes, Ginny D, and Jolly Bimani players. It's a D&D 5e game that is also kind of an escape room physical puzzle solving session. If you ever watched Relics and Rarities on Geek and Sundry, which was also Deborah Ann Wall, it's got a lot of that same DNA to it because she loves having like physical puzzles that people actually have to solve in the moment.
I don't think Ginny D is going to be part of the regular show, but instead you have Iman Vellani, our very, very beloved Kamala Khan.
That's right.
Also Will Wheaton and a bunch of other people, and it's just like, this looks a lot of fun.
Yeah, and she actually, that's one of the things that she did in Relics and Rarities is she would have a core team of people, like 3 people that were always there, and then she had somebody else that rotated on for different episodes. That is where we got the excellent moment of having Kevin Smith on there and him talking about how she was trying to kill his character, and she said, "I'm just returning the favor," which was a deep cut about Kevin Smith writing the issue of Daredevil where Karen Page got killed.
That is brilliant.
It was great. Anyway, we will have a link to that in the show notes.
We are happily part of the Polygamers Podcast Network, helping you run and play your best games. We think you'll enjoy another Polygamers podcast like
Pandas Talking Games. Queer gamers talking about tabletop role-playing games and making outtakes. Join Pandas Phil and Senda every other Wednesday, answering listener questions about playing, running, and designing TTRPGs. It's like Car Talk, but for your games.
We've used up all of our resources, so I think it's time for a long rest. I hope this adventure was rewarding for you, and we hope you go exploring with us when we start our next adventure.